the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer, someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer, baseball in the summer.
It is a Friday morning coming off of the Blue Jays starting off their season with a win. And here we are with Doug Lunney, a real winner for McMaster and a real winner in life on a number of fronts. So we're thrilled to have him for a MacCast. Doug, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
It's unusual that we'll get into the fact that you are one of those few athletes that straddles the picket fence of having one foot in the McMaster camp and one in the Brock camp, and you don't want to slip when you're doing that. That's all I got to say. Doug, amazing. Bring us up to date with where you are today, just in terms of for those McMaster and Brock, is a fair number of Brock guys who know you and have had some exposure to you. What are you doing today? And tell us a little bit about all the kilometers you're racking up with a couple of varsity kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. And it's really like reliving everything all over again with the kids, right? And I'll get to that. But personally, my wife and I, Lisa, empty nesters for the first time this year, like Billy and others, which is a new adventure in itself. But career-wise, just to bring everybody up to speed, when I came out of McMaster, my original plan was to get into physiotherapy, and that quickly turned into more of a business focus. I did my MBA at Mac and ended up playing a couple more years because of that, which was nice. And then I ended up in the pharmaceutical biotech industry. So I've been in that industry ever since. 4 different companies, currently with a company called Amgen, based in Mississauga. And I'm a director of digital transformation, whatever that means. Means a lot of different things for different people. But I've been with Amgen for 15 years in different marketing and sales and commercial related roles, and been in this current capacity for the last 3 years. So interestingly, Mississauga based, but mostly remote at this point. So what you and I are doing today is very typical for a day in the life of Doug Lunney at this point. So a lot of time at home, a lot of time to spend with Lisa and our new dog as of COVID. So we keep busy with the dog, and as you mentioned, very busy traveling the roads, watching the 2 kids play their respective sports. So I'm sure we'll get to read and his experience at Brock a little bit more later on here. But he's loved every minute of it, and we on the other side of the province, going up north to watch Abby play with Nipissing, and similar to you, traveling kind of all parts of the province throughout the fall and the spring. And
you can't pick really, your campuses couldn't be further apart. Pretty much, right? It's crazy.
You could have coordinated things a little bit better there.
So why don't we start with, you come from a family, and you can talk a little bit about, not your current family, but the one you grew up in. Very much involved with sports and coaching and playing and all those kinds of things. I think your name's fairly synonymous with Newmarket. Why don't you kind of go into that, where you started playing? I'm assuming that you were probably, like your kids, in every sport imaginable, and kind of settled on a few that you were excellent at. Why don't we start there and tell us a little bit about Doug Lunney before there was a McMaster in your
Yeah,
present.
for sure. Yeah, so definitely Newmarket baseball and Newmarket and the Lunnies, going back way beyond myself, has a pretty good legacy. So my dad certainly and his three brothers all grew up in Zephyr, which is a small town just east of here. But they started with the Zephyr Spuds Kings as potato farmers out in the Zephyr area, and created a pretty good legacy there. But then moved into the Newmarket Rays, I think it was called, and had a lot of success with that team. And that's when fastball was a really big deal, particularly in the Newmarket area and surrounding areas. And so they became a bit of a household name for sure in the fastball um, realm of Ontario. And um, when my dad stopped playing, he ended up becoming my coach and coached me most of my baseball career. And then I continued that with Reed for a number of years, for all the way from kind of rookie ball up to junior. So my dad, certainly for me, has been a huge champion when it comes to the importance of sports and baseball and hockey, and obviously learned a lot from him, not just as a player, but as a coach. So we have very different styles, I would say, my dad and I, but he certainly taught me a lot. He was a teacher, as was my mom. We have a lot of teachers in the family, and he, I think, enjoyed the coaching part of teaching more than anything. But yeah, we spent our whole life in the Newmarket area, and really baseball was a key part of that throughout. So um, as I mentioned, enjoyed, I don't know how many, 30 years of playing baseball in Newmarket, all the way from T-ball to senior for several years, and actually playing with a few of the Mac guys, my last couple. And then coached Reed, as I said, for 10 plus years, and hockey in the Newmarket Aurora area as well. So coaching is something I've really enjoyed, been a huge part of my life, and hopefully I've had some impact on the kids over the course of those 10, 15 years.
Well, I would say, because we'll get into it a little bit later, but my daughter played against yours
Yeah, yeah.
for feels like 30 years at a certain point.
Yeah, long
And
seasons, Mike.
yeah, like lots of early, especially when they were young, you get the horrific, very early starts to games. So you'd have to be at the
Yeah,
arena at 6 o'clock, at
that's right.
6:30, waiting for it to open, and it's freezing cold out there. And hockey has one of the strangest things to it, which is, coaches. And I don't know whether you operated this way, but certainly Courtney's coaches operated this way until she got to Durham West and finally decided that
Yeah,
rather than beat them, join them. Um,
why not?
the coaches always had this thing about having the kids there an hour and a half before the game. And,
Yeah,
the
I
reality
remember.
is, as parents, it was just like, wow. And we have to travel. Generally, there's travel time. So we're getting up at
Yeah,
4:30, 4 o'clock sometimes. And, but the thing is, then you would get there an hour and a half early for the first game of a tournament. There's no way that it's not going to start on time. And
true.
you just sit around for like 90 minutes because the kids literally do about 10 minutes of stretching,
Pseudo
and
warm
then,
up. Yeah,
yeah, soon warm up, and then they're
yeah,
ready to
that's
go
right.
in 20 minutes. So I was always like, why don't you just ask them to be there 45 minutes in advance, so that as parents, you're not sitting around for an hour and a
Yeah,
half and then for another
yeah,
hour for the game. Oh, it's just unbelievable. But
yeah,
baseball was the same, as you know. I mean, it's all about, as a player anyway, showing up to the park a couple hours. You take it in field, you
absolutely.
take a BP,
Yeah,
but the fans didn't have to show up. Like, that's the difference, right?
that's
The
true.
parents didn't have to be there 2 hours before the game. None of them were ever. They would
Yeah,
just show up right when the game was ready to go. So,
which is what
uh,
I'm enjoying now, Mike. I can say after 15 plus years of coaching, it's nice to just be able to show up and enjoy and relax. And though not always relaxed, I can say, but nice to just be able to show up like other parents, as you mentioned,
that's amazing. So, were you always? Tell me what positions you. I mean, you obviously
Yeah,
started very young. What
yeah.
positions did you gravitate towards?
Yeah, I was mostly a middle infielder and pitcher. So back in those days, there was no pitch counts or anything like that. if you recall. So it's it's a different world now. I think when I think back to the number of pitchers we had on my teams, it was a handful at most, and we would end up pitching 2 or 3 games in a weekend, right? It was not out of the question, and that's probably why at a fairly young age I developed some arm issues in my elbow, but you know, you get over that and you keep going. But mostly middle infield pitcher. Played a little outfield when I was really young, but mostly shortstop and pitcher as a young kid, and then I moved over to second base and played a bit there when I got older and I couldn't throw as well. Um, so that was my primary position, and my dad was always a pitcher as well, as was my uncle Bill, and I think I gravitated more towards my uncle Mike. I guess he was more in the middle infield, but yeah, I learned a
You,
lot from my dad and my uncles. Not necessarily about the baseball part of the game because they were fastball players, but a lot of transition, obviously, or transferable skills, I should say. Um, so yeah, learned a lot from them growing up, and didn't really learn how to windmill pitch because I started in baseball all the way through. But yeah, wasn't a power hitter like my dad, but I learned the pitching, the thinking part of pitching from him for sure.
did you enjoy, like, and I've said this to several other pitchers, like I don't think, probably in my career, I had maybe 30 at bats total,
Yeah,
because they were like, just hide the bats from him. He's horrific to begin with. And given that I would throw inside so much, I don't think they wanted me anywhere near a pitcher. Did you
yeah,
enjoy
no
the hitting?
retribution.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the hitting part of the game?
I did. I prided myself on being a pretty consistent hitter. Not a lot of power, obviously. I probably only had 3 or 4 home runs in my life. I think Reed's already surpassed me in that category, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed the defensive game more. I would say I could take ground balls all day, and probably did so a lot of days in the summers with my dad. And yeah, really probably gravitated more to even middle infield and defensive play than even pitching. Though I probably turned more into a pitcher later in my career. Um, but yeah, I definitely enjoy both parts of the game, and I think, as you say, with kids nowadays, the opportunity for that is a lot less. I see a lot of kids start to gravitate not just with sports and focusing on one or two sports, but from a positional point of view, that's pretty uncommon at this point. I even know from my most recent coaching experiences where you get a lot of kids who they just don't want to hit, they want to pitch, and the PO term has become very common, and a lot different now with pitch counts and everything, obviously. But
Yeah, it's a different time too, and we'll get into the development of your pitching repertoire, because it's
yeah,
like you're pretty you had a robust one, let's say, compared to a lot of kids who would have come out fastball and something
yeah.
else. um did you play base? Was there a high school baseball in Newmarket, or was it strictly rep at this point? And kind of
Yeah.
tell us a little bit of what the high school was like, and making the decision to focus on baseball, and then to your university choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, actually, my wife and I went to Dr. John M. Dennison Secondary School in Newmarket, which was the school Reed and Abby went to as well. So, we were actually the first graduating class. It was a brand new school back in, I can't remember what year, but we were the first ever graduating class that went all the way through. And we didn't have baseball, we didn't have football or baseball. We had fastball. So that's, I guess, where I took some of my dad and my uncle's experiences and applied them. But played a couple of years of fastball, but also played volleyball and basketball. And as you mentioned earlier, I think we all played most sports back in the day. We didn't necessarily focus on one too early on. Um, so yeah, I spent 5 years back in the day at Denison, and a great experience there. And contemplated going south of the border and explored that a little bit. I wouldn't say too seriously. I think similar to my own kids, who also contemplated those choices. I think very much a family, close to family, wanted to stay close to home. And I think from an education point of view, McMaster provided a great opportunity for me. And I had contemplated some other choices. I don't think Brock was one of them at the time, but I think Waterloo was in the mix and Laurier. And so those were kind of my primary choices, and then ended up at Mac in the kinesiology program, which was a great experience beyond the baseball part, which we'll talk about. But Master was a nice size, nice campus, great reputation and program. And, Reese and I and others ended up in the same program, which was nice. And we got to know each other even before we knew there was a baseball program. So it was nice to call Mac home for 4 years. And then, as I think I mentioned, from a business point of view, I ended up moving into the MBA program there and spent another 2 years in the co-op program with a bit of a mix of the classwork and some work experiences mixed in.
Well, I will say this, all of you at Mac are lucky that Ted and I only ran the league for a year, because eligibility limits were a big thing we were trying to put through. And because of the experiences of playing Laval, and now I think about it, we have Scott Hughes, who may have had a 10-year CIBA career or CIBA combined OUA career, and a few of you got 5-6 year runs out of it. I'm like, wow, this is
right.
It's really helped the schools that have graduate programs, but that's hilarious. Now, to go back a little bit, you've stressed the importance of, how Newmarket is home, and, you went to high school there, you grew up in sports there, your kids have also, maintained a base there. And you said that, your wife went to the same high school. Did you guys, were you guys dating in high school? Is this, or
we
is
were.
it? Yeah, wow.
Yeah, we were
High school sweethearts,
grade 11. Grade 11 onwards. Lisa ended up going to York. After that, I was at Mac. So she lived at home and went to York and spent a lot of time at Mac on the weekends with me, and got the university experience that way. But yeah, we met. We knew each other a little bit younger, but more acquaintances and just saying hello as we wandered by. But got together through some mutual friends in grade 11, and been together ever since. So
that's amazing. It's high
yeah,
school
nice story.
So sweet, eh?
Yeah, and nice to see the kids kind of go through the same experience now at Denison, and they can see our pictures on the wall still, which I think I looked about 10 years old when I graduated. So
you're still pretty baby faced when you shave, man. I got to tell you. So you go to McMaster, and you recall what residence you stay in residence first year, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, Brandon Hall, 7th floor. We'll never forget that experience, and Lisa won't forget it either. When we dropped, my parents and her dropped me off, she was not too happy with all of the commotion and saying goodbye within a couple minutes, and that was it, right? So yeah, Brandon Hall. I was there for a couple of years, actually. I spent first year in one of those dual rooms with my roommate Ted. He was from Ottawa. He's on the swim team, so woke up early every morning and woke me up along the way. And I spent another year there in a single room, and that's when we started playing ball. Actually, the second year I was there. I remember the day Reese and I went to his residence right next door. I'm trying to remember what the name of his residence was.
I think it's Woodstock Hall, right?
Woodstock, might have been, Woodstock Hall. And that's where Billy and others were hosting the meeting about this baseball program that we didn't have any kind of knowledge about. So I remember wandering into that meeting room and kind of being excited, but wondering what it was all about. So yeah, I spent a couple years there, and then we ended up in Bates, which was the condo style residence. And I can remember being there for the first year party that Billy ran. So Billy and I ended up in the Bates residence for a few years after that. But
oh my goodness, so look at, everyone has heard a little bit of my referencing Purple Jesus parties at McMaster.
Yes, sir.
So,
it comes up often.
Yes. So is this a part of the McMaster experience that you should prep anyone who's watching this and saying, this is kind of the deal, you got to live up to this, and I mean,
Yeah,
at Brock, it was different. We didn't, there was good parties on res, and then, a couple of us baseball players ended up with the corner house in the student ghetto. So we would have lots of keg
yeah,
parties, and
yeah,
I hate to admit it that we may have the odd time had frosted flakes with beer on it just to, as we got. But I mean, the Brock experience was really defined by being very close to the U.S. border, and when you were
yeah,
finally of age in the U.S., you could go over, and there were bars where you would pay a $10 cover charge and drink all night for free.
yeah.
So that
Good
led
option.
to a lot of craziness in the U.S. But tell me a little bit about at just the social atmosphere of the residences at Mac and Purple
Yeah,
Jesus. Do you recall what was in Purple Jesus?
that's Al Cool, I think, is what was in there, and
Okay.
Kool-Aid, I think. But yeah, that was an experience. I mentioned coming for the first day and everybody dropping me off. That Purple Jesus story was pretty soon thereafter, right? So I remember wearing purple shirts, having purple mugs, and having garbage cans full of it right away. That never seemed to end for the next week or so. So that was my first intro, certainly. And I wasn't a huge partier in high school or anything. I was pretty low key, and Lisa and I spent a lot of time together in the last couple of years. But um, that was a new experience for sure, and I think it's probably tamed a little bit nowadays, Mike. But I think there was a lot of forced social activity back then, which is good for kids who are maybe a little shyer and a little less experienced with that. So for me, it was nice because it forced a lot of immediate contacts and friendships, and um, you really did create a strong bond with the people on your floor. In particular, a lot of competitions and a lot of things early on in your university career where you felt almost like a team and a family on that floor, right? So, and then it cascaded to the residences competing, and it became a very fun atmosphere from a social point of view. And whether you were a party or whether you just like to hang out, lots of opportunity for kids, and whether you were in residence or outside of residence, visiting the residence, it was a very welcoming atmosphere, I guess was a good word.
Yeah, it helps blow off the anxiety. Like, they talk a lot these days about kids carrying a lot of pressure, anxiety, and that kind of stuff. And it might be healthy for them to kind of look at ways of blowing it off a little bit. It's the hard part
Yeah,
is with social media, for us, thank God there wasn't cameras around, because, there would have been a lot of pictures of many of us in
yeah,
compromising positions, passed out in bushes or whatever.
yeah,
But it was also, you're right, it was really healthy from the point of view of meeting new people under circumstances where everyone's guard is down. And
yeah,
I think more so just, it's hard enough being away from home. You're all kind of in the same boat. People do idiot, I mean, I think the statute of limitations is expired on this, but I can remember that we all got together and decided we all wanted to prop our beds up in residence because we needed more storage. So we
yeah,
went
yeah,
stealing milk crates, right? And drunker
yeah.
than
Sounds
skunks.
familiar.
Yeah, but milk crates were great. You could put your CDs in them, you could do all that stuff.
Yeah,
So,
multi-purpose.
it just was one of those rites of passage. So I think it's good. And hopefully, as our kids are continuing in their university experiences, they've got their own unique twists on it. But I'd like to see some of that return,
I
maybe with a
agree.
little less.
I agree. I think it is changed for good reasons, I think, in some cases, but I think that forced social activity and the opportunity to just let loose a little bit is not as much as what it used to be. And I know at a school like Nipissing, for example, a lot smaller and a lot more contained and less of that mentality that you recall and that I recall from Mac days. But I think it's nice to see the kids in both cases, whether at Brock or at Nipissing, in my kids' cases, really find their comfort zone they're both very different kids, but I think they've found nice networks of friends and nice experiences, obviously through their teams, which I think is a big part of why they're loving the experience so much. And for us, when we started playing ball in the second year, I think it just created another level of camaraderie and friendship and connection with people that went beyond what you had even within residence or just from a general university point of view. And I can see that with Reed and the Brock guys, and I can certainly see that with Abby and the hockey team up there. They spend so much time together that if kids can get that opportunity right from the start, it really does ease the transition.
Yeah.
Creates a lot of structure and a lot of immediate connection with those people. So it's great if kids get the experience, and I know ours are getting that in different capacities. So
Absolutely. So you attend a meeting chaired by Bill Newton, so this must have been priceless
yeah,
knowing Billy. Was
yeah.
Don Graves at it yet, or had you met the
He
coaching, or it was?
no, no. I was Billy and a few other. It might have been McGrail. I played 1 year with those guys, and then Billy started to help coach after that, right? So I think probably McGrail and Billy and I think Reese and I just saw a flyer somewhere actually, and just ended up going. But yeah, I don't remember the conversation that much, but I remember there was a fair number of guys who showed up, and it's funny because you start to recognize guys from summer ball and Reese and I played against each other, didn't know each other
Mhm.
well at the time, but we ended up playing together after that in the summer, so it was kind of cool. Didn't really know what to expect, and even coming out of the meeting, we weren't totally sure what it all meant, but it turned into a pretty awesome thing for the
Yeah,
next 3 years of our university for sure.
yeah. I think and I've said this on some broadcasts, right? When you played in that Leaside Metro League,
Yeah,
and and in Eastern Ontario, you had a really everyone kind of knew who each other
yeah,
was, either just
yeah,
reputationally or you played against them. So it's like comfort food when you have players that can
yeah,
play out of
sure.
those leagues where you're kind of like we didn't have a great um, visibility to the kids that were on the west side of the GTA because we never played them, only at
Yeah,
elims, and
yeah,
usually by the time you got to eliminations, I don't ever recall seeing a Burlington or a Niagara Falls or a
no,
Welland or like the
no.
we never played those teams ever. So
Windsor. It
um,
was always Windsor.
yeah, there was
They were always a
obvious
nemesis.
obviously Windsor was a nemesis, and
Yeah,
High Park. Like
yeah,
you kind of knew the teams that you had to beat. And but we didn't see anyone from Ottawa. We wouldn't see anyone. If you went
that's
further
true.
east, it ended
Yeah,
at Kingston. We would play the odd
the
game against
ponies.
Kingston.
It was
Yeah,
Gibby's old
yeah,
stomping ground. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
and we had a kid from Brockville, so we would, because we were in
Okay.
Oshawa, we would play the Brockville Bunnies on occasion, and
Yeah, yeah.
but no visibility to anything. I think for us, baseball stopped at Etobicoke and then just carried all the way to
To
Windsor,
Windsor.
right? So
Yeah, that's true.
so probably pretty good to see some people that you knew could handle themselves. Um,
Yeah.
do you recall the did it go from that meeting into some sort of practice or uh team camp or anything like that? Do you remember meeting the coaches for the first time?
I do, and I think the meeting actually happened midway through the year before. So it was mid-year through first year. Yeah, it would have been. And then it was the following fall that we started. So I remember um, Reese and I actually came to school early for practical because we were both in kin. And it was actually a slow pitch practical that we were there a week early for. So we ended up living in somebody's house for the first week before camp started. And then I remember showing up to camp and kind of wandering in and kind of wondering what to expect, right? I remember Henry was there and Donnie was there, certainly. So that first experience was interesting because I had grown up playing for my dad, who had a certain style, pretty soft spoken guy. And then I'm walking into Henry hitting like 100 ground balls at me for, I don't know, it seemed like 20 minutes. But I remember running hills at the park close to the school there. And I really remember that rapid fire ground ball till you basically drop drill that Henry put us through. So um, the beauty though was, once that camp, um, practicing every day, being with the guys every day for short seasons, obviously, but concentrated heavily. And um, I loved practice, as I mentioned earlier. I love taking ground balls, love the defensive part, love taking BP, love throwing BP, and I I loved every minute of it. We didn't in the summer. We didn't practice every day. We didn't get that experience. It was, on the field a couple times a week, a couple games a week. But this experience of being part of a program that's constant, it was awesome.
And
And
did
wasn't
you?
expecting it either, right? When I went to
Yeah,
Mac, had no expectation I was going to be playing baseball. So I kind of given up that thought that I'd be playing at school. So it was a
yeah.
great surprise, and turned into probably the most exciting part of my university experience.
That's great to hear. Now, did you remember your first conversation? Was it with Don and saying, "Look, I play in the infield, but I also pitch," and
Yeah.
did they encourage you to do one or the other, or they just kind of let you do both because you're great at both, obviously.
Oh, thank you. I recall the first conversation when I was going to throw a bullpen, and I remember the bullpen was basically a grassy area behind the screen at this high school park behind the school, but it was interesting because Donnie didn't know me really. He didn't know me. There was no recruitment or anything back then, right? So it was kind of a blind audition. And I remember throwing the bullpen, and I remember him thinking, got good control. He throws a bunch of pitches, doesn't throw very hard, maybe relative to others, but I think he saw pretty quickly that I could be a fairly consistent pitcher. And so at the time, don't recall a conversation of whether I could do both or shouldn't do both. I think it was, let's wait and see what we have. And I think it just worked out that way, that I played infield when I wasn't pitching. But as I said, I remember pitching so much even back then, versus what you would see today. I think I pitched 10 games in one season, which seems like in today's schedule wouldn't probably be possible. So I feel like I definitely pitched more than I played the infield, but usually I was playing short or third when I wasn't pitching.
Yeah, that's a lot of games. I mean, I
Yeah,
started 7 of them,
it's
but
a
we
lot too.
also yeah, but we had a 36 game schedule, right? We played in the
Oh,
U.S.,
true. Yeah, that's true.
so it's a little bit different when you've got. I think we went 4 to 5 starters for the all of that, and you would get
Yeah,
5, 6 starts in there, and um, interesting from it's really interesting to hear. Um, did you remember what your thoughts were on what the talent was that you were seeing around you at that point? And because you would have
yeah,
a good basic comparison with Newmarket, or
yeah.
you know,
Better
do you
than
remember?
expected.
Okay,
Yeah, I think it was interesting because we had guys from all over the country to a degree. We had Coop from out west or out east, sorry. Um, then Billy, and this was the first year was pre Husey and Gibby, and those guys came, I think, the year after, right? So I think it was interesting to see, as I mentioned earlier, guys that you recognize from summer teams, and Pino was there from Etobicoke, and Billy, and guys that you didn't know but you knew, right? So I think overall the talent level was stronger than expected the first year, but then just got better and better the next couple of years with the guys I mentioned, Husey and Gibby and Grilly and
yeah,
others. So it was it was interesting because you didn't know what to expect, right? It was such a surprise opportunity, and then to see the level of talent as well. with guys that had made similar choices to, stay home and, focus on education first. I think it was pretty optimistic, I would say, after the first couple workouts.
Yeah. And, do you recall, I mean, obviously that first year that, Brad and yourself play is actually
Yeah.
95. So it's a couple years before you guys win the
Yeah.
nationals and you have all those guys in.
Yeah.
Um,
We can beat
and
you guys.
yeah, it was the same year we came in, right? So
Yeah.
right away, there's kind of this four-headed monster, I will say, but I like to poke Ken Babcock and Sam Dempster a little bit in the side there and say that
Yeah.
Durham was really, fourth in a in a 3-team race. But immediately there's a
Yeah.
rivalry with Brockvmac and U of T at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all three programs, I think, way better than anyone expected. What are your recollections of the rivalry with Brock in particular? Because it was super heated for your entire career there.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, why you guys, despised Brock, because it's safe to say it reached that level, but also there's a respect between the two teams because you guys kept beating on each other until you both won national championships. What do you recall about playing the Brock Badgers?
Yeah, it's probably all I really recall, to be honest. I mean, I know we played other teams, but that's really what sticks out and why it was so interesting when Reed made the choice he did, right? So I think it's kind of inherent, I think, in situations like that where you have two teams that are very strong, you got a lot of talent, you got a lot of respect, as you say, for each other. And the team that's kind of standing in your way, right, of getting to where you want to go. And you mentioned the national championships, which is obviously the goal. And I remember those playoff games and even the midseason games, though, in the short season I think were heavily intense. And those are the games on the schedule you always look forward to most, right? And so I think it goes back to just the fact that those two teams were very competitive right from the start and had a lot of mutual respect, but a lot of competitive kind of edge whenever you came across each other, right? So I think it's continued too. I think you can still kind of feel it, even though
You turn
these
right, you
kids
can.
don't know the history as much probably, but sitting in the stands and watching the Mac versus Brock games is pretty cool. I actually sent Donnie a picture of the playoff game this past fall of the two teams and at Bernie Arbor too, right? So it was interesting to give him the look back there.
It's amazing 30 years that it hasn't changed much. Like from what I heard I talked to Coach LePage and he said, when we play Mac, they like make animal sounds out of their dugout and like, we just want to kill them. And then
Yeah.
I'm sure if we talk to the McMaster coach, she'll be like, yeah, Brock is, like this bunch of arrogant, we were always painted as the kind of more corporate. It's funny. McMaster, as a university, certainly very credible, very more traditional, high entrance marks, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Medical,
Program,
big medical faculty. But the ball team was always a little looser. You guys were more rebellious. You didn't have a coach that Coach McRae we weren't allowed to have facial hair. He wasn't allowed to grab your hair under the hat. Yeah. And so we were kind of always the Yankees of Canadian baseball because the program was pretty strict.
Yeah.
And you guys were a lot more rebellious, but probably that didn't stifle things as much sometimes. And you couldn't ask for two more opposite cities, more opposite programs, although it feels
close
like
in vicinity, but
like just intense, right? So very interesting. Before we kind of get to nationals and stuff, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the teammates that you got to play with, and just the impact of lasting friendships and just some of the characters and some of the
Mhm.
people that really stick with you after 30 years on those Mac teams?
Yeah, long list for sure. I think I mentioned Billy, obviously, who's certainly been a friend, mentor early on, and someone who I've stayed in touch with for sure. And it's one of those relationships that you don't see each other that often, but it's kind of like a continuation every time you do, right? And my wife and I went to his 50th last summer, I think at some point in the summer there. But you know, he's one of those guys you just people gravitate to, and people I think just generally want to stay in touch with, right? And he almost forces it. So he's certainly the guy I would think of right off the bat, largely because he's the first guy I remember when we started it all off. But someone who I think he mentioned that ended up playing together after the fact and spent a couple of years in Newmarket senior together, and then moved on to our kids and staying in touch that way. So Billy for sure. I mentioned Husey and Gibby and um, Dexter and others who, I remember because they were part of the most exciting experience we had. Grilly, obviously, who is our catcher, my catcher for the most part at that point. Scott Ralph, who came a little bit later. Pino, obviously, quite a character. And you mentioned Richie. We won't get into that, but lots of lots of guys who brought different things to the team and different personalities. And as you say, they maybe a little looser and a little more out there, but lots of great memories from all those guys. And Donnie, certainly we have a lasting relationship. We try to stay in touch as much as we can, and he's very interested in what my kids are doing, and he's always checking in. And got to see him and Pat last summer, or 2 summers ago, I should say, when we were out in Halifax, which was nice. So yeah, it's hard to stay in touch with everybody, but I think we try. Aikit's another guy that I should mention. He's always trying to organize things still that can try to keep the guys together, and I think they're trying to plan a golf getaway this summer with whoever can make it. So, yeah, it's one of those things, right? It's one of those groups that always be there in some capacity, and whether you're seeing each other or just checking in once in a while, um, it's kind of a lasting memory and a lasting friendship, which I think is probably similar with you guys. Um, so
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all now have a reason to get our asses into shape because we're going to drag ourselves into a uniform in September to try to, see what 50-year-old rivalries look like.
yeah,
It
can't wait.
wouldn't surprise me to see, Fletcher and Henry still lipping, 30 years after the fact. But it's,
Yeah.
I think, the things that kind of stand out are just when you see your teammates and you haven't seen, like there was a bullpen catcher. We had 3 catchers at Brock. One of them was a third string guy that only got 10 at bats all year. And his job was just thankless. He would have to warm up the
Mm.
pitchers, which sucks, right? Because you
Yeah.
bounce the stuff. And but he had the greatest
Yeah.
attitude. And when I did his podcast, his name's Matt King. Just so much comes back, and it's like no time has elapsed. It just brings you back to a dugout conversation or the kind of stupid off the cuff, like my curveball's not working today kind of conversation you would have as you were warming up. And, teammates are always your teammates. And I think that that's a super cool part of all of this is it'll bring everybody back and remind them that,
For sure.
like there was, there's certain people that you think, wow, I wonder what they're doing after 25,
Yeah.
26 years. And then when you find
Yeah.
out, you're kind of like, wow, that's either shocking or not,
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about, your relationship with Brad Reeson and that as we get to nationals.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about eliminating the Brock Badgers in '97 on your way to the national championship, and that very intense. It was a playoff. I think best of three, right? And then you guys,
I think so.
I
Yeah.
think Reeson walked him off, right? And this is so funny. I tell everybody this. You might not know this, but in '95 when we were playing at, I don't even think that was at Bernie Arbor. It was maybe beside Bernie Arbor, and it was freezing cold. We had to come to Mac just before we
Yeah.
were going to Montreal. You guys had just been eliminated from going to the Nationals, so we were going with U of T, and it was freezing, freaking cold. And but Jeff Lounsbury came up to me, and I said, you guys got to really watch Reeson. Okay, I played with him long enough.
Yeah.
This just isn't going to end well if we put him in a position for him to win the game. And he's like, yeah, he doesn't look like much. And,
Unassuming. Yeah.
super unassuming, not a huge guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he finished that game 5 for 6. Between the doubleheader, he was 5 for 6. And the one time he was out was, we had a closer named Steve Vatour who had a wicked slider, and I don't think Brad had seen us. It would have only taken him one more at bat to zone it up, but he hadn't seen a slider like that, because I hadn't seen a slider like that in ever. And but he just crushed the ball. Everything was on a line. He hit the fence a couple times on just one of those what you've seen this swing 1,000 times. Yeah. It's no more than 10 feet off the ground, and it screams and hits the fence and it doesn't raise. It doesn't go down. It's just a laser beam. But it just, I think there was a bit of an arrogance on the Brock side in terms of, we're going to get him out. And, that mentality, which is a baseball mentality, you're like, I don't really want to pitch around this guy. Every pitcher's like, I'll be the one that gets him out. But sometimes when you play with fire, you get burned. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about eliminating Brock in '97.
Yeah, you're bringing up things that I didn't necessarily remember in that level of detail, so I appreciate that. But I think, as we talked about earlier, anytime you can eliminate an arch rival, it's going to be a little more exciting than knocking out Laurier or somebody. So I think, as you talked about it, it was always the Brockvmac, U of T to a degree, but those playoff series were always so intense and exciting, and it was always the gateway to the next stage, right? So I think, speaking of Reese and how clutch he always was, I think you probably should have pitched around him, but he was always that guy. Like you said, he was always so calm and so unassuming, but well prepared always. The one thing I remember about Reese right off the bat was how he approached it on deck circle all the way to the plate. Very intense, very zoned in. Probably on the flip side, always thinking he's going to beat you, like you were talking about, in terms of the arrogance pitchers can sometimes have. He had a very quiet arrogance, but very quiet confidence that I think was why he was so special. Very respectful guy, but very intense and well prepared, and always the guy you probably wanted up in those situations, right? So I think the outcome was obviously a good one for us, and always a little more amped up when it had to do with eliminating the Badgers.
Yeah, when you do it on a home run, I think that's even it's like it's a
Joe
unique,
Carter.
Yeah, it is kind of a unique experience,
Yeah.
and for a guy that wasn't, I mean, Brad hit his share of home runs, but he wasn't really a power guy. He was an alley guy, and I think that's special. And I think Roger Reeson, his dad, has this picture of Brad crossing home plate and you guys going bananas, obviously. And if you think about it, in the early years, right, it's there was a series of teams between Dalhousie, Laval, McMaster, Brock, that won every national championship for big long period of time because the programs were so far advanced, and yeah, very interesting. So tell me a little bit about being a pitcher. There's a different mentality being a pitcher. I freely admit
Mhm.
that my pitching mentality is not everyone's style. uh, I'm a mean, nasty bully when I pitch, and then the other
Okay.
4 days when I'm not, pretty easy going because you can't operate like that more than just
Yeah.
those 3 or 4 hours. Are you more of a thinker type where you're thinking the game or were you kind of like me, just seeing red and thinking I have to kill the person in the batter's box? What was your mentality as a pitcher?
Yeah. No, definitely more the former. I think I learned at a fairly young age from my dad, and certainly from his pitching experience on the fastball side, that there was a lot more to pitching than throwing it through the wall, right? So I remember having a screen set up in my dad's backyard that I would pitch to daily in the summers, and I would work on my control. And so I was much more of a control guy, much more of a thinker, much more of a mix it up and leverage all the pitches I had. And my mentality was always that I would outsmart you, and you would never know what was coming. And so I really did concentrate more on that part of the pitching game than velocity. So I think kids nowadays are taking a much different approach. I think there's lots of programs and focus on the velocity side, which I understand. But for me, with my size and abilities, I had to almost kind of focus in that area. So that was certainly my game, was the thinking part of it. And I prided myself on um, being in control and trying to outsmart the hitters, which I think probably was what made me successful in certain cases, right? Um, and being able to mechanically pitch a certain way that allowed me to have more stamina and probably more longevity. We talked about the 10 games in the one season, but just allowing that to happen, I think also was part of the reason for that success. So I think certainly the control part, the thinking part, and the resiliency. I never wanted to come out of a game. My dad would certainly tell you that if, as a coach, if he ever walked out to take the ball, I would look the other way. So, and then probably Donnie the same. So
It's a
yeah,
good
love the competition, loved controlling the game from the mound, and yeah, it was.
it's a good quality to have when when they have to shoot you to get you to turn the ball over. And I obviously have some firsthand knowledge of seeing your act up close. So you're one of the very few. You had the big curveball, and that was
Yeah.
really the pitch that was very definitive because it was a hard 12-6, and a lot of top on the ball and a lot of bad swings off of it. But you would work around the zone and then, get people with that. And, that's very, again, unusual. It's like a reverse pitching sequence in Canada where, um, you had people like me were much more working off their fastball. And, when you're left-handed, it just naturally moves. So,
Yeah.
I may not have had a strategy out there, but the fact that I was kind of like angry and the ball moved a lot, bailed me out of a lot of bad pitches because it would start
Yeah.
down the middle of the plate and move 3 or 4 or 5 inches, and you'd it'd hit the end or it would hit the handle, and that kind of bailed me out of not. I should have probably, if I would have been able to think a little bit or apply a strategy, I could have been way better. But from
Yeah.
that perspective, you have to go with what I think this is the other thing being a coach. Sometimes I've said that high performance, which is really a big pitching thing. It's like being a goalie in hockey. Where people get caught is they get caught somewhere in between, right? If you're a thinker, you got to really think. And, a coach has got to encourage the thinking. You got to prop that up. But if you're a person that thrives on the emotion of the game and is one of those people that, the worst thing you can tell someone like that is to think about what you're doing, because you're taking away from their strength and you end
Yeah.
up in the mucky middle, and you end up compromising your performance as a result of that. Did you find it difficult? Like, the one thing that McMaster didn't have that we had at Brock was we had a pitching coach and we had a head coach that was also a pitching coach. Was it a little bit difficult having to kind of self-govern, or is that something probably coming from the amount of coaching that's in your family tree there?
Yeah.
You're probably pretty good at being your own pitching coach, but do you, in retrospect, is it something you wish you had while you were there?
It's a good question. I think you don't know what you don't know sometimes, right? So because we didn't have it, you didn't necessarily think about what would it be like if we did. But I think now, seeing how these programs have evolved, and to your point with Brock having more of that back in the day, I think it certainly wouldn't have hurt, right? I think it's something you got through Donnie and Henry to a degree and others, but Billy, I think as an ex-catcher, maybe provided some of that as well when he started helping out on the bench. But yeah, I don't think it would ever hurt. I think leveraging what my dad, taught me, and self-governing a little bit, certainly it was how we probably managed at the time. But yeah, I think when you look at how things are structured now, it's hard to imagine not having that back in the day, and you kind of you're bringing up things I didn't really think about. So it's yeah, I'm sure I would have benefited. I was a pretty emotional guy and tense guy, and expected a lot of from myself. So I think where I needed maybe more of the coaching was on that side, and just calming me down and keeping me in control, which I think Donnie always and Billy and others did a nice job with. So yeah, but it's nice
Yeah,
now to see all the support these kids get, right? And how much coaching and training they do, which we didn't really do as much back in our days.
yeah, it was that's exciting. So tell me a little bit about finally winning a national championship. Was that must have been exciting for all of you, and just felt like the accomplishment of quite the journey. Do you have any memories specific to winning the nationals
They do.
from your own time on the mound, or just the experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I can picture those days so well, and I can't remember the name of the park in St. Catharines there, but certainly can picture myself warming up that first game on the Friday night against Laval. Um, and that was the first and only no hitter I ever threw. So that was,
You threw it in nationals.
yeah, the first game of the Nationals against Laval. So that was my um, first and only, and certainly not the most important memory of that experience, but something that kicked it off pretty good. And for me, I always had so much family there, and so much support from my parents and Lisa and her family. And I remember just all the people that were there with us that weekend as well. And it was a cold, rainy fall weekend, like it typically is in those playoff um, baseball times. But yeah, certainly remember that first game, and warming up before and all the way through, and the last out that I think I fielded off a ground ball. Um, and again, not a big strikeout guy necessarily, but um, great defense behind, and lots of support to make that happen. And then I remember pitching the final game and actually getting beat up pretty good early on by Laval and getting pulled from the game, which, as I said, wasn't something I was generally too happy with. And then, coming from behind, and we had lots of bats that could pull us out of a hole, and I can't remember all the specifics, but I remember certainly Reese played a huge part there, and Coop and others to bring us back. And yeah, the feeling when you win something like that is it's like no other feeling, right? And I hope Reed has the opportunity to win while he's at Brock, and experience that, because it's it's something you always remember. I can remember the hugging my dad right after, and feeling his tears, like it meant so much to him as well, and not something he had ever won in his illustrious baseball career. So it was something we all got to experience together. And I still have an album that my parents kept throughout that season, and it's got a lot of great photos of of the team and of Reese, and there's the picture on the front is of Grilly and I after that first game on the Friday night. So yeah, lots of memories that just live on in so many different ways, and now I get to have that hope and experience for Reed in a different uniform, but that's okay.
Well, it's we live vicariously somewhat through our kids' exploits, but generally
Yeah.
are pretty laid back about it, and we'll get into that in a bit. But so you go through this amazing experience. Tell me how your Mac career finishes up, and then we'll talk a little bit about any absurd stories you can remember of your teammates and stuff before we transition into Doug Lunney executive.
Yeah, so the last couple of years, as I said, after that year, I'm trying to think now, Mike. You got me thinking. When I got into the business program, the last 2 years, we never made it back to the pinnacle like we had in '97, but certainly a great 2+ years that I wasn't expecting initially to continue playing. And at that time it was a new roster of guys every year, right? Like it was kind of cool to see the evolution and the generations almost from when we started in that meeting room with Billy to being in the MBA program and playing with first year kids that are just starting out, right? It was kind of a cool kind of experience to see both sides. So yeah, don't have as much of a memory of the actual baseball part in those last 2 years because I didn't have the university experience, the regular experience that I did in the early years, right? So I was in co-op program, which meant I was working in a few cases while coming back to play ball on the weekends. And so I didn't have the same kind of daily experience that I did before. I wasn't at all the practices. I wasn't feeling quite the same as a member of the team, right? So I was kind of a guy who came in after working all week on the weekends to play a bit, but it was still, think back to the overall experience, and a lot to Donnie for sure, and a lot to the guys to even accept that kind of role and being able to continue for the last few.
That's it's interesting to hear that spin on it, because it is, that was kind of like, that reminds me of the last, I think, 3 or 4 years of my baseball career, or well after Brock, I have left arm will travel, so teams would bring me in, but the deal was that they, I would show up on the games I would pitch, and then not be there for the other.
More common now for sure.
Yeah, and you kind of felt, it just felt a little bit mercenary and a little bit like you were disconnected from the team as a result of that, and the height of that insanity was my last year, where I was 35, 36 years old, and my teammates were all 21.
Yeah.
And I would, the deal with the coach was I would show up, start the game, and that was it, but it just felt like I didn't even know I couldn't even remember the name of the left fielder all the time, right? Because it was someone that had joined the team, and I didn't even know who it was, and they were like, they wouldn't know me either. They'd be like, who's just starting the game today, and what is going on? So you kind of have a little bit of that, which is a different experience, and obviously how tight-knit you guys were winning a Nationals. Doug, do you have any ridiculous, crazy stories that can pass through a R rating, that you could talk about during your McMaster playing days, that you crack out when you're doing a golf foursome with three other guys?
Well, the rookie party jumps out obviously for somebody who, as I said, was not eccentric, kind of aggressive partier back in his high school days. Coming into that environment and experiencing something like that was something that jumps out. Right? I came out of there with head shaved, stumbling back to residence with Reese, and it was probably the one experience that jumps out just from the early days. But I think the other thing that's funny is our teams growing up were all very, say, professional, quiet, which is much different than today. And I remember, Hughesy's and Gibbies of the world, really introducing me to the chirping part of baseball, right? And this became much more of a thing, every year going forward. And now, as a coach, Mike, I I I have trouble with the amount of constant chirp. You mentioned the animal noises and things like that, but it's just constant, and it's interesting to see how the game's evolved in that way. But I remember these guys; they always had something to say about somebody, right? And that's you know what I remember, and what made it so fun was just all the personalities, and those guys brought a different flavor, in those second couple of years, and during the national run was much different than the first year. So it was it was cool to see it evolve for sure, and the game has evolved, and the way people approach the game, and that part of the game has become a big thing, for kids.
Yeah, look at you could use a dose of old school though. The reality is if you'd have tried that stuff, when either of us were pitching, you'd be wearing a ball. There's, like it would just become part of your
Yeah,
uniform, like right
yeah,
between the numbers, because I hated chirping. Like
yeah. It's yeah,
I didn't show up people if I struck them out. I didn't do a big fist pump if they hit into a double play or anything like that. It was just run on and off
yeah,
the field and do your job. And yeah, be intense about it. But, we used to hit,
respect. Yeah,
there was a lot of respect. And, we knew there was kind of like, and I know people kind of joke about this because in hockey, it's kind of a bad cliche, but in baseball, there was definite etiquette to it. So, if someone
hmm
went in high at second base, guess what?
hmm
Next time that guy comes up or the very next batter is going to be wearing a ball. And,
yeah,
if someone mouthed off and started it, as a pitcher, your job was to stand up for your teammates. And,
hmm
you wouldn't just go about the business of pitching. At that point, you would anoint yourself. Okay, I'm our tough guy today. This guy's going to
yeah,
get one. And, because you just wanted to deter that type of behavior. And now you're right. It happens all the time. And
yeah.
it
It's too
feels,
bad because we had such a great rivalry back then, but I don't remember that being as much a part of it.
well, the
And
coaches would
nowadays,
never, yeah, the coaches would have
it's
never allowed it. Like Don, very
you're, you're
respectful
right.
of the legacy of the game. Coach McRae, we weren't allowed, like you had to run, if you struck out, you had to run back to the dugout with your bat in hand. And
Yeah,
we didn't chirp at all. It was like dead
yeah,
silent.
yeah,
And Coach Kemp, Daryl Kemp, was exactly the same. He's like, it's disrespectful to the game for you to be mouthing off to the opposition. And then
yeah,
clearly, as time went on, there was Daryl and Mike both left the program, and Coach Lounsbury had a different style. Well, then it became a little more
yeah,
contestuous, and so the chirping came out of the coach's mouth. But we'll talk a little bit about you winning a pitching award. I had the same experience at Nationals where I won that award, but it started with chirping.
yeah.
The coach for McGill chirped me when I was warming up in the first inning, and that's the exact wrong thing to do with a pitcher. It was just like
Especially a guy like you.
I can't believe that old man said that.
Yeah,
If I could throw it into the dugout and hit him, I would. but I would get charged with
Hit the
assault. So
ball.
I'm going to take it out on his team. And I,
Yeah,
very similar to you, I think I threw a 2-hitter and I balked in a run. We won 8-1,
yeah,
and I struck out a whole pile of people. And like McGill was never going to win that game, but it all started like he set me off by chirping me. And it was colder than hell, and usually I didn't
yeah,
pitch very well in cold weather. I don't know about you, but I hate pitching in cold weather. It
yeah.
just wasn't
I'm
my
with you.
thing. But I think I was probably sweating just
You
from
were
him
amped.
doing,
Yeah,
because a coach lipping you is something that never happened. And the guy was an Expos
yeah,
scout, and I thought, I can't believe that he did that. And so
mm,
now we live in an era where the coaches lip, the players lip, the
yeah.
parents get into it.
You didn't
The
even talk about that.
the umpires sometimes say like
Yeah,
umpires would never, they
yeah,
do, they
yeah,
so it's a totally different game, and kind of ridiculous for people like you and I who grew up in a different era without pitch
hmm,
counts and that kind of tough guy mentality.
yeah,
We talked about it on the Chris Peters podcast. If you got hurt, you just rub dirt on it and you'd keep going.
yeah, yeah,
um, it's a totally different thing. So we'll talk about this in respect to your son and how hard it must be to see the evolution of the game and not weigh in and go, Reed, my day, because it sounds like you're one of those grandpas that said, I walked to school uphill both ways, right?
yeah.
So,
Oh, that's my dad. My dad
yeah,
has a real problem with all the chirping, even more than I would, like, because it goes back even further, that way of approaching the game, and he has a tough time dealing with that. And he's still around the Newmarket teams and still at every one of the Brock games, obviously. So he he's not a big fan of the new age.
well, it's funny because Mark LePage, the coach of Brock, was on that first year staff and would have had lots of exposure to McRae and Kemp, who would
Yeah,
frown on this stuff. But I saw Daryl Kemp a couple of years ago coaching his son. His son now pitches at Brock,
yep,
and Daryl was like chirping his own players about their long hair and their kind of like a kind of a,
jewelry.
yeah, defiant
Yeah,
attitude
yeah,
too, right? Like it's like
yeah,
they're just it's a different time, and thankfully today's coaches are more flexible a little bit and allow expression. It's all an era of self-expression. So
yeah,
bat flips and all this other stuff is flying, and it would have never. There would have been it would have been a
yeah,
bloodbath back in the day. So
yeah.
let's move on to you now getting into your career, and
Hmm.
you graduate with your business degree, and is in there, you getting married, and this was a decision to
Yeah.
go back to Newmarket. Was there any um, thought otherwise, or was it always going to be this plan of returning back to what is kind of your home base?
Yeah, so we got married in 2001. So we got married actually in the midst of um, my doing the co-op MBA program at Mac. So it was kind of close to the end, and I was in my last term, and we had gotten married, and um, we had always planned to stay in the Newmarket area. We're very, very close to both of our families, and um, really had no thought of moving too far away. We started in Bradford and lived for a few years there, but always had the plan to move back. And Holland Landing is actually where we live, just north of Newmarket, small town. We both actually grew up here, Lisa and I, and our families both still reside here. So we get lots of drop-ins, lots of support with the kids once they were born from both sides. And the family's been such a huge part of our life. And as I said, I think part of the reason why both the kids decided to stay at least closer to home for their university careers as well and follow a little bit in our footsteps. But yeah, so when I left the MBA program at Mac, I ended up starting with a company that was one of my last co-op term actually through the program. So it was a company called Pharmacia. My first experience in that pharmaceutical industry, and it was actually a nice combination of the education I got through kin plus the business side and that healthcare environment, and it became a nice mix of the marketing and the health sciences. So yeah, really good fit right away. I spent a few years at Pharmacia. We got acquired by a company called Pfizer, which most people are familiar with. And I ended up shifting over to AstraZeneca, which is another company in the Mississauga area. So I was there for a couple of years, and then over to Hoffman La Roche, and then to Amgen. So been at four different companies, similar industry. Started in more of the kind of business analytics side of the equation, and then moved into more of the marketing and sales and commercial side, which I've been in for the last 15 years or so. So yeah, owe a lot to McMaster, certainly for the education and the experience I gained there. And I think the one thing I say to my kids, and you probably do the same, is the academic part is actually a small piece of it when you think about what you learn through that experience in terms of just the independence and working with people and understanding how to interact and deal with different people. It's a huge part of what we all do, regardless of what career choice you make. And I think those experiences, and we talked about some of the personalities even just on the ball team, right? And how to adapt and work with and engage with different people, which I think I learned a lot through the university experience, and then certainly through my career experiences and just the progression I've made through the different aspects of the commercial side of pharma and biotech. I think it's been a great career so far. I can't believe it's been as long as it's been. I've been with Amgen now over 15 years, which in today's world is less common. I would say a lot of people are, particularly after COVID, jumping into new career choices or making moves. And I know a lot to Amgen, a lot of great experience, great opportunity, and been a great fit for our life and being able to continue experiencing all these things with the kids now. It's been great for Lisa and I, and my parents and her parents, right? And whenever the kids play, you'll see a pretty big contingent of Lunneys and Leeches in the stands, whether at the hockey rink or the ballpark.
I have seen this because we're now about to get into. We'll touch on your son later, but your daughter and my daughter continuing the Brockvmac type of mentality. Your daughter is an amazing hockey player, and I will say that I think they were very, very young, and Courtney was playing in Oshawa, and I think Courtney scored a goal in double overtime to eliminate you guys, and she
yes,
took
I do.
She took a shift at forward. It was her only shift of the game where she went out as forward because she's typically a defenseman, and she was at the tail end of a shift. And I just remember the parents from Oshawa going bananas. It was like so intense.
It was in Aurora. I think it was in Aurora.
It is. Yeah. It was in Aurora, and I just remember the parents going bananas. And typically my older daughter was a great goal scorer. Courtney, was very defensive oriented.
Yeah.
But she did a little half deke, and but it was pretty intense there for a good long while. And your daughter was amazing. And
thank you.
Courtney would say to me, she's so hard to handle, and tell me a little bit about coaching and the difference. It's different coaching girls, as you know. It's a totally different mindset a little bit. And what was it like coaching your daughter, and tell us about her hockey career a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's something I remember well, Mike. It led to a lot of opportunities for her, obviously, but I think the coaching aspect for Lisa and I, she was always the manager of these teams, and we had a very close-knit group. We always tried to create a family atmosphere, and a lot of our best friends now are coming from these experiences through coaching Abby's hockey and Reed's baseball to a degree. But yeah, coaching girls is something, as you say, different, yes, but I do think there's value in taking some of the ways in which we've traditionally coached the boys and bringing it over to that side, which which I tried to do in a balanced kind of way, right? I think we created teams, and certainly Abby became this kind of player where they would just go through the wall for you. And I think developing rapport with girls and showing that you care and, getting to know them at a different level was something I always tried to do. And I feel like I had a really good relationship with a lot of them and their families, which I think led to strong commitment, 100% effort. We had 100% of the time logos on their practice jerseys, things like that, where you can really push them if it's done in the right way. And I think they really did. I think learn the fundamentals that were most important early on. And Abby, as one example, used to be out with my dad when she was 2, 3 years old for parent and tot skates every week, twice a week, and he played a big part in her early development as well. So I think coaching girls is different, yes, but I think a really rewarding experience, and I think being able to coach your daughter and create opportunities for her and the other kids was, um, you know, probably one of my most uh, one of my most important accomplishments as a dad. Just seeing her develop and seeing her love the game still. You mentioned some of the rivalries we developed even with the kids, right, through those experiences. And I think the friendships they create are long lasting. Abby's best friends are still those that she grew up playing hockey with from a very young age. And just the networks they create, right, of kids that they've played with or are still playing with. It's important for what comes next too, to create those relationships and networks beyond just the hockey. So yeah, coaching wise, I spent 10 plus years coaching Abby in Central York. And you know, as I said, my best friend is a guy I coached with all the way through. And it's the relationships you develop, and
Well, you guys had
the
the great,
lasting.
you guys had the great arenas. That is the one thing that was Estronic, and like
That's
comparative
yeah,
to,
the Magna impact for sure.
yeah, like just beautiful arenas. And but it is a respectful thing too. That it is similar in some ways, I think, with some of the more prominent Brock and McMaster players. But let's just translate that, and you take Brock and McMaster out, and you slide in Aurora and Durham
Yeah,
West, or Aurora and
Oshawa
Clarington,
back
or
in the days. Yeah,
Oshawa.
yeah,
Like Courtney would come to me and always enjoy playing against your daughter. It wasn't like I hate her, or it's not any
yeah,
of that stuff, right? And I know that there was a kid, Reese Whiteman, who played with
yeah,
Courtney for years, who came to play
yeah,
for you. And
yeah.
her parents, Jason and Christy,
Christy.
would just be raving about the experience. So I think there's a great respect amongst the parents and the players and all those kinds of things. Tell me about your daughter's journey to Nipissing, and kind of where
Yeah,
her hockey career is today, because I think it's pretty exceptional and people would love to hear about it.
yeah. Thank you. And it's interesting, right? When we talked about the kids staying home and deciding to stay in Canada and Ontario and somewhat close to home, even though it's 3 hours away for her. I think she played her entire hockey career in Central York, which is rare nowadays. I think when you see, especially in girls hockey, kids moving and jumping to different teams. And certainly there was interest and opportunities for that to happen, but it always came down to Abby's preference and decision. And she always wanted to, even from a fairly young age, create a bit of a legacy within that organization, right? Which she has. And I think she's, one of very few kids. Oh, I think I lost you. Hold on, Mike. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I can hear you. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I can still hear you fine. So yeah, she played all the way from like fundamentals back in 2007, 2008 to junior, and from there made the decision
fairly early on, grade 10 or so, that she wanted to stay in Ontario, and made the choice to go to Nipissing. But along the way, I think you're probably aware she had the opportunity to play in some pretty exciting things beyond Central York, and we all ended up in Sweden. I guess it was 2 winters ago now, watching her and the U18s, and she was fortunate enough to make that team, which is not easy to do, and won the gold medal with Team Canada, and also had a great experience in PEI at the Winter Games and playing for Team Ontario. And she's been very fortunate to have those opportunities beyond just her local hockey career. And at the same time, I think she was always very focused and committed and dedicated to getting better, and she earned those opportunities for sure. I think she, like your daughter Courtney, from a mutual respect point of view, has always been a very humble, very respectful player in her own right, and I think has always played the game the right way, I would say. She's a very, very kind-hearted kid, and well liked, I think, by most. And whether you're playing with her or against her, I think she's created a good reputation for herself. And then this year at Nipissing, she made that choice, as I said, pretty early, and a lot of it is going back to her love for family and being close, and having people there experiencing it with her, which has been the case. She's always, I think, wanted that, and she developed a great rapport with Darren Turcotte, the coach, and was welcomed by all of the teammates, and she had a great first year experience there. And she was recently, named the Rookie of the Year in the OUA, and got named to the All-Canadian rookie team as well. So she's had probably the best experience you could hope for a kid in her first year.
Yeah, what is she taking up there? I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's always interesting to me. Like I think it's interesting to understand what people take for what her career path is kind of looking like. So what's she taking up
Yeah,
there?
she's in the phys ed program, so her primary focus is teaching. That's what she's anticipating she'll end up moving into beyond the phys ed. So, yeah, I guess following in my dad's footsteps and my mom and others in our family, we have a lot of teachers within the extended family. So, yeah, and Abby does a lot of coaching already. She's involved with Unitas Hockey up in the Aurora Newmarket area, and she's still helping out with the Panthers camps and programs in the summer. So, yeah, she really loves working with kids, and really, like my dad, loves the coaching part of teaching as well. So that's her main goal. Though you never know nowadays, Mike, with the kids, and what they take in school and what they end up doing could look quite different. And I think because they learn so much beyond the classwork and just the people part, which we talked about, I think is creating a lot of versatility and flexibility for them to take different paths. So hopefully the teaching works out, but I think she's setting herself up for other possible opportunities, even in hockey, right? So hopefully.
I think you and your wife should be very proud of the fact that your child doesn't want to become an influencer. There's a stat that in the United States right now, 80% of the potential workforce wants to be an internet influencer, and or a YouTube star,
Yeah.
these kinds of things. And those are not really practical careers, to be truthful. And some people are very good at it and figure out the algorithm and make millions of dollars. But, I think it sounds like this is going to be yet another generation of Lunney that'll end up, following a formula that seems to produce great people that are great leaders. So speaking of which, that'll bring us to the fact that you can't show your face on the McMaster campus without getting flogged
Yeah.
now. Tell me about Reed and his decision to play baseball at the arch nemesis, Brock University.
Yeah, for sure. And Reed, like Abby, grew up playing baseball and hockey, and um, showed signs of being a pretty good athlete pretty early on. And he had a lot of great baseball and hockey experiences growing up. And um, I think baseball was always his go-to. I think he, as a young kid, would play baseball all day, right? Like he would always have a bat in his hand and always want to be practicing, and was always one of the smaller kids, interestingly, growing up. And when he got into grade 11, he shot up, and now he's 6'2", 6'3", 180. He's a big guy now. Anyways, so as he was thinking about where he wanted to go beyond high school, I think he definitely wanted to play ball somewhere, and didn't really, to be honest, consider the US at all. I think he really wanted to stay close to home, and I think he knew, certainly from my stories and experiences, that Brock had a pretty good baseball program, and he definitely had Brock on his list. He looked at Waterloo and Laurentian, and he was looking more in the sports business side of things. So, obviously Brock's a great choice for that, and he ended up making the choice to go to Brock, which yeah, I let Billy know and Pino just so they were aware. But uh, I'm very proud to wear the Brock stuff now, Mike. So tough in the beginning to even fathom it, but my dad and I are very proud. You'll see us wearing Brock stuff all the time in the fall. Um, yeah, but Reed had a tough time, right? He was a grade 12 class. It was right in the middle of COVID. Didn't have a lot of um, great experiences to end high school, and then he actually ended up taking a year in between, right? Because that one COVID year, if he had started, there wouldn't have been baseball. He wouldn't have been in residence. He, probably wouldn't have gotten the experience he's ended up getting. So great decision for him to take that year and figure things out. And then, as getting even in contact and from a recruitment point of view, those things kind of took a different path, right? So I think he was fortunate to have guys like you who could help influence at least the engagements that ended up happening with him and the coaching staff. And yeah, he basically was a walk-on. Though they knew him, he was a bit of a walk-on that first year, and had a good camp. And after I think a couple of games to start the season, he ended up pretty secure in the lineup, which was nice for a first year guy. So yeah.
Yeah, I look at, and I may have applied a little bit of pressure to the coaching staff that involved physical threatening, which is my MO. But I would say that, it gets easy. Like they had a lot trying to get a program back up and running from it being parked, right? From COVID. And, Coach LePage has a high responsibility job that is, outside of coaching the team that's difficult. And he's also got the legacy of the Brock program is a little bit like the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's been 3 coaches in its history, and all 3 coaches were on the very first staff. So, it is it has a different scenario, and it's hard for the existing coach to always live with the legacy of the previous one. And, Coach McRae's stamp was all over that program for the first 4 or 5 years. And then Coach Lounsbury was there for a long time, and his ways of doing things and his philosophies that permeates the program. So Mark, having been exposed to both of them, having spent a little bit of time coaching at Guelph, now is wanting to put his own stamp into it. And it's a unique situation. McMaster, I always feel for you guys because there's a football program at McMaster. Mm-hmm. And that takes up a lot of the sun, right? Like there's just...
For sure.
At Brock, they don't have it. They got a great stadium where they play. And, it's a little easier to become a bigger deal on the Brock campus because you don't have to compete with football. And so, I think from that perspective, the program has all the ability in the world to be what it was when it was started, which was it was always going to have US and Canadian games. It was going to be a real good alternative for Canadians who didn't want to necessarily get roped into going down to Nebraska and taking bass fishing as part of their academics. I want a business degree. Well, no, you get a general arts stream because you'll be playing baseball 8 hours a day. Here's bass fishing, theory of basketball, and a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And you virtually get no education. And that's not to cast shade on it. Like, not every American experience is like that. But
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is, and parents need to hear this, the truth of the matter is that baseball is a non-revenue sport in the US. So this idea that there's untold number of international scholarships floating around isn't true. There's a lot of quarter, there's a lot of half,
Mm-hmm.
but by the time you factor in the exchange rate,
Yeah.
the fact that your kid wants to come home on occasion, so you're flying or they're flying,
Or you want to go watch them.
or you want to go watch them, which they appreciate and will remember 20 years from now. It's not the nirvana that people think. It's very difficult to get a full ride scholarship as a Canadian. A lot of times that comes at the expense of what is it that you're going to be doing 10 years from now. Yeah, if you feel that you're going to be a professional baseball player and you have a scout that says you should really go the college route and do this because it'll lead to a professional career in baseball, then maybe that's something you should really take a good hard look at. Otherwise, the reality is you want the experience of playing college baseball, which is still, people don't know this, but only 5% of people who play rep. And, rep is a big system, it's tons of players, but it's hard to make a rep team. Only 5% of those people end up playing, varsity. So, the fact that our varsity sports don't, we don't have 100,000 people at a football game like they do at Michigan.
Yeah.
But if you go to the campus at Western, or you go to the campus at McMaster when McMaster was in the Vanier Cup, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And the quality of the play is great. So, the quality of the play at the highest level of Canadian baseball is amazing. If you were to just take out the edges, so, if you took out maybe the bottom 3 pitchers and you took out the 4 or 5 guys on the roster that maybe are good players but not necessarily great players, and you were to just pick up the top 3 pitchers from the next year and you were to pick up the 3 or 4 position players that would come in, these teams would do exceedingly well in the United States. And
a lot of them come back, right? Like, it's amazing to see how many kids on these Canadian teams are kids who have been elsewhere and coming back for the reasons you're talking about, right? Not always.
Yeah.
In some cases it is, but there's lots of benefits to taking the route our kids have taken.
Yeah, and I think the number one is that they have the support of their family. Like, I can't imagine being in the, I can remember Courtney was looking at a deal with the state of Minnesota. It was in Minnesota somewhere. And I said to her, look at where Minnesota is on a map and, think of, even doing your laundry or something, thing that parents do all the time. They take you out for groceries. We all do that stuff at university. That's not going to happen when you make those choices. And if you don't have an absolute path at the end of it, you're going to compromise your actual future, because the one thing you can count on is a degree that's earned here is something that's validated in terms of your employment and your path forward. You can't always say the same when you say, I've got a 2-year JUCO or I've got a general arts from a 3-year college, or, and the variance of an education is much higher there because there's a private school system. There's religious affiliate schools. There's all kinds of things. And, I went through a process where there was a Baptist coach that wanted to recruit me, but that meant no cursing, no, like a whole bunch of lifestyle adjustments. I had already been at Brock for a year. So for me, I really loved the social aspect of university, to your point earlier. So that would have meant giving up beer. Now, that sounds ridiculous to say,
Yeah.
give up beer to play baseball, but the fact of the matter is I didn't have to.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been put in that position. And, luckily I had some options, but, other kids don't get it's an either or. And sometimes they need to look at what the consequences of that choice can be. So I think it's super cool that your kids are here and having great experiences,
For sure.
because I think it grounds them a little bit. And, it also, there's other things in life that come into the mix,
Nope.
boyfriends.
Absolutely. And the other huge benefit for playing baseball for Reed at Brock is it's a short season. They love every minute of it for 2 months, but it's intense, right? Like it's busy for those 2 months, but then the rest of their year they get to experience the rest of university, right? And they're not tied up the entire year with baseball, right? And so he plays everything else under the sun. He plays lug hockey, plays intramurals, he plays basketball, volleyball, whatever else Brock offers, which seems to be everything, like he just loves it. And so he gets a bit of both, which you don't necessarily get at some of these all year round programs. Even the hockey for Abby's a bit different, right? It's a long season and she doesn't necessarily get that extra part that he does.
No, I think it's good for, I think it's good for them, because they also, because it's intense and all of those kinds of things, but you also get some time to kind of get your legs under you from an academic standpoint. And people got to remember that the point of going to university is to earn a degree at the end of it, and or learn the skills that are going to lead to your employment when you've got a family of your own you have to support. And I think that those are underestimated. People don't look that far ahead, right? At the end of the day, they think, they're going to be there's always these dreams, as you know, from having been a hockey coach. Yeah. It's crazy, the stuff that you hear out of parents sometimes, where, now you're going to see it with women's hockey, that they're going to play in the Women's Professional Hockey League. People have no grasp of how great a professional player is, at a certain extent. I pitched against a few of them, and they're the best of the best. Like, you can't even conceive of it. And, I'm very happy to have been a good to very good Canadian university player and Canadian rep player, but there was no chance I was ever going to be a professional baseball player throwing, in the low 80s. And, that's, and without yeah, like it's just, when you see a true blue professional player, it's they're that times the 0.5 that you can't get. That 50% better comes with taking steroids or taking some sort of human growth hormone. It involves being a U.S. citizen, not a Canadian one.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 things that go into it. And I wouldn't trade you don't trade the experiences. You wouldn't trade your McMaster national championship and your McMaster experience for 3 years at, North Iowa State, taking steroids, taking HGH, and with no promises, but, also a degree that is suspect, having no life skills, and all of a sudden you find yourself working at a drugstore in Des Moines, Iowa. Like, this is the reality that people, so I think your kids are headed for a great track. Doug, let me ask you this, with you being an empty nester, you got any grand plan, aside from partying every day and throwing confetti about the house, you and Lisa planning on doing any traveling, or are there any things that you've got kind of in the mix that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. We actually just came back from Washington. We were there for 4 days last week, just caught a Leaf game and caught some of the sights in Washington, which was nice. And we're planning lots of those little trips, right? We went to Vegas before Christmas, so we're trying to space them in between when the kids are home, and yeah, just get some experiences we haven't been able to get up to this point because our entire lives have been spent traveling with the kids, which has obviously gave us great experiences as well, right? And I mentioned Sweden with Abby, with Team Canada, and PI, and with Reed in Halifax a couple of years ago for the Nationals. They've taken us lots of places, but now we have an opportunity to experience different parts of the world we haven't necessarily had the chance to yet. So yeah, some small trips planned. We're maybe going to go to Boston to see the Jays in the summer, and we're going to plan our trips around the Jays and Leafs and see different parts of North America at least, and then yeah, that from there we're both turning 50 next year, and we'll celebrate our 25th the year after. So yeah, haven't ironed out those details yet in terms of where we might go, but yeah, travel's certainly on our list, and we have the dog as well, which has brought a different joy to the life as well. So yeah, we're enjoying the empty nest from that point of view, but this weekend the kids are both coming home, and it makes it that more exciting, right, when they are home, and we'll look forward to having them here for the 4 months in the summer. So yeah,
It's amazing. Now you have to ponder this. Okay, in about 6.5 months'
yeah,
time, you'll be probably pitching in a doubleheader that your son is going to be playing with after, and the reality is he's likely going to be sitting in the stands with the ability to heckle you like all these kids like to
I'm
do.
sure.
Uh, you know, are you ready to suit up and throw an inning or two?
Throw an inning or two sounds a little aggressive. Maybe play second base. We'll have to see. Uh, I've thrown, I don't know how many hours of batting practice the last 15 years, Mike, but I don't know if I could make a full inning from 60 feet, 6 inches. We'll have to see. But I'll prepare myself accordingly.
Well, I'm just going to prep the coaches to say that, in each bullpen, there'll be one of those pitching machines like they use in kids ball, because,
Yeah.
It could be a disaster from that perspective. It's, at
Yeah.
least half the Brock guys have arm problems, not tied to baseball. Some of them, like Chris Ebel, who was a great pitcher at Brock for a long
Yeah.
time and a Hall of Famer, hurt his arm passing a sippy cup back in the car, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all those things that happen as you get older, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I ruined my knee playing recreational slow pitch. I never
Oh,
got
yeah.
hurt playing baseball other than blister problems every so once in a while. And then I started playing recreational slow pitch, and that was the descent to hell. So I've had 3 knee surgeries, and I have no ACL in my left knee, all from
Slow.
running the bases, which I should have known, right?
You
Like,
should have left
there's a
that at the
reason.
bench, eh, Mike?
That's exactly it, right? Like, if there was room for designated hitter and slow pitch, I should have had it. So, all good. We're really looking forward to all this, and
Yeah, thanks for doing all this. It's definitely something we're looking forward to, and for a good cause, obviously, on both sides.
yeah, and we'll end this with a little bit of reflections on Brad Reeson, who's the main driver of the McMaster side of this equation. But, I speak a lot about Brad, and he was a sweet, gentle guy, and one of the more health conscious people I ever met. So he and I talked a lot about how did he end up with colon cancer, and as guys get close to 50, it's important to get screened and get looked at. But tell me what your memories are of Brad as a teammate. And for those of you who don't know, Brad passed away from colon cancer about 7 years ago now, and just a little bit about your memories of Reese, who would have been in the same program as you and played with you and all that kind of stuff. Tell me about your memories of him, both at Mac, and then you guys played a little bit in Newmarket together.
Yeah, he's still on my wall in my basement here, Mike. I have a picture of him here, and he'll always mean a lot to us. I think from the first meeting that I mentioned that we went to together, and just meeting him for the first time, I think you just got that feel for his genuineness and his kindness and his ability to attract people, right? Like I think he just had a way about him that made people feel welcome and whether as a teacher, a teammate, or as a friend, I think he was just such a special guy, very selfless and humble and unassuming. We've used that term a few times, but very strong leader in his own right. I think he led by example. He led by showing his care and respect for his teammates and others. And I didn't know him as well as a teacher, but I'm sure his students and the families that were involved with him felt the same. Just an overall nice guy, great athlete, obviously, and clutch hitter, as we talked about. But more importantly, just a really good person, and I think everybody had a lot of respect for him, and we certainly have a lot of fond memories from the Mac days. But just even after that, staying in touch, and even after his passing, seeing his parents now and again, and staying in touch with the family, I think has been nice. So our families became close at Mac, obviously, and the parents have stayed connected, and that's been nice. But yeah, I remember the last time I saw Reese, and it was a tough day, but nice to be able to see him and interact with him for a few minutes for the last time, which was nice. And I think attending his memorial and seeing the amount of support and amount of number of people that were there from Mac or just from the Oshawa area, was a pretty good testament of what he meant to so many people.
Yeah, he's I'll speak more about it from my own personal perspective, but Brad touched a lot of lives, very selfless.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the thing that I think that, he'd give you the shirt off of his back kind of a guy, and always with a little twinkle in his eye. He was always up to, I used to call him Dennis the Menace, because he would do funny things to get you in trouble, or, and you'd be like, I knew you did it, Brad, but, I think we all feel his impact in our lives every day, because he always taught me an appreciation for simple things. Like, he was a simple guy that really liked the process of getting down to work on a ball field, for example. He liked taking batting practice. Dad would throw him batting practice every day. And, that relationship that a lot of the great ball players have with their fathers is something that Brad also had with Roger.
Mm-hmm.
He would just go through the work of throwing him balls to hit every day. And, so kind of funny from that perspective. He retired pretty early from baseball, relatively speaking, compared to some of us. And, really got into his cottage and, running and swimming and all that other rigmarole. And, I say it, did you ever, you would have been a better match for him. I played squash with Brad for years.
I did.
Yeah, did you? I couldn't beat him.
Played a few times. Yeah.
I like, his hand-eye coordination was ridiculous, right? Yeah, and I was twice the size. I say this with a little wink, but I'm about 6'3" and about, when I was in really good shape, probably about 210, 215. So quite a bit stronger than Brad. And so, I could blow the ball by him, but do you think I could beat him? No, because, I would be sitting there with my tongue hanging out, and he would dink and dunk. And, like, it was impossible. He just would get to things that no human being should be able to get to. I've never seen hand-eye coordination like that in my life. And so I'm glad that you and I are brothers in the same frustration club, because I would get close. I might beat him a game, but then
you a little bit, with that. In his eyes, you said.
Yeah, I think he played he was like a cat with a mouse. I think he did it. He's like, I'll let them get close, and then I'll just kill them at the end, right? It's like, anyway.
No, for sure.
Amazing, Doug. Well, listen, I'll let you get back to it. It's the Easter weekend, but thank you for doing this. You know, and we'll see you up at Nipissing, clearly.
Yes, sir.
But we'll also see you hopefully before we get to our reunion here. You and I are long overdue a beer, and thank you for today.
Thank you. All the best to your family, Mike.
Thanks, Doug.
Take care.
Well, the smell